All right, so we're going to get into a video meet recap. Now, this is also going to be on Instagram, but I kind of wanted to talk through this one because this was a different type of meet, at least for me. So, my client Emma, who also happens to be my girlfriend, she competed in her first powerlifting meet, which is awesome, and she did really good. She went 9 for 9. She got third place in her weight class, which was very competitive for that meet. Third out of 9 people, 82 and a half kilos. And she also qualified for states in like 38 days now, I believe. So, ton of success there. And walking into the meet, we weren't going in there for placing and we weren't going in there for qualification. We were just going in there to try our best. Now, in the back of my head, of course, I had those mainly the qualification in mind, like this is very possible. But I didn't really talk about it that much because I didn't want that to be her sole focus. I wanted her to just have fun, and she did. So that was a great meet. And getting into the attempts. So with squat, we were able to match her best in the gym with 215 pounds, 97 and a half kilos. We went with the planned attempt there. With bench press, we went with 62 and a half kilos, 137 and a half pounds. This is 2-3 kilos or 2 to 3 pounds under her best in the gym, which was 140 pounds, and that was on kilos. And deadlift, we went with our planned 320 pounds, 145 kilos. Now this is actually 10 pounds under the best that she hit in the gym, but we'll get to deadlift in a moment. But with the squat, if we start getting into some background first, actually. So this was her first meet, like I said, and she's only been powerlifting for like 6 months, 6 to 8 months roughly. She started in April, kind of loosely. She started in April with me, but before she was just kind of doing SBD kind of randomly, just for fun, maybe like once or twice a month. And she was able to get some pretty impressive numbers, even just for not doing it officially or on any kind of program. Right before we started working together, she had like a 125 bench or 120 bench, a 200-pound squat, and a 320-pound deadlift. So crazy starting point for not really doing it. Since then, in the past 6 months, she's added 20 pounds to the bench, 15 to the squat, 10 to the deadlift. So 6 months, brand new. So of course, with someone that's brand new, a lot of the gains we're going to see are going to be coming from just doing the movement more and just getting better at the technique, understanding how to coordinate better. It's called a neuromuscular adaptation, so our nervous system coordinating our muscles. And that's exactly what happens here because her technique also got really better and then the weights got up. Now, getting into some timing. So, when she started powerlifting officially, like in April, she knew she wanted to do a meet, which means we didn't have a ton of time to get something together. We really only had like 2 macrocycles, and they weren't even full macrocycles. I think the first one was only like 2 blocks, and then we had the prep. So, not a ton of time to just build, right? Especially for someone new, we want to spend a lot of time just building that like raw strength, like in that moderate, maybe sometimes higher rep range, focusing a lot on the accessories and good movement quality. But because we didn't have a ton of time, we had to really figure out how can we peak her strength on a given day so that when we get into a prep block, we know what to do and we know how to make her strong or make her express her strength. So when I say express her strength, there's a difference between showing how strong we are and building up strength. So when we focus on making a certain day feel really good and perform really well, we're focusing more on expressing that strength and making sure we're not doing anything too fatiguing, but also making sure we're doing enough so that that specific day can feel and perform strongly. That's really important for something like a prep because in a prep, what are we doing? We're preparing for a powerlifting competition where we're going to be lifting pretty heavy weight 3 times. So we need to know how can I get that person to be strong for that specific task. That's where we want to be able to express that strength so that we can be strong. On the other side of the coin, there's building strength. Building strength means we're going to be probably doing some relatively higher volume, higher to just doing singles and stuff like that all the time. So maybe we're working in like the 3 to 5, two, maybe even 2 to 5 rep range, and we're just focusing on building some general max strength qualities, building our base. So that could also include things like work capacity, so just being able to recover from things. That could even be from something like cardio if it's a really low hanging fruit for someone. So we're building work capacity, we're building some general strength, we're increasing the size of our muscles, so taking some sets closer to failure on maybe like machines or free weights, and then also probably throwing in some movements in there to coordinate ourselves better as well. So maybe some unilateral stuff, split squats, single leg hinges, single arm pressing, alternating pressing, things like that to coordinate us better and have us moving in different directions. All of those things combined kind of build our base of strength that we can then express that strength from. If we don't have that base, we don't have anything to peak off of. So we had to spend almost an equal amount of time like building those qualities up, but also figuring out how am I going to express this in like 6 months, because 6 months isn't really a lot of time when it comes to programming. So I know that kind of got off a little bit, but it's important to establish that. So for her, we had to find rep ranges that were basically going to make her come in strong on one day of the week on all 3 lifts. Now for technique. So my main focus for her technically was get her to move under the competition standard, move under control, and most importantly, move with confidence. Because the first meet is already going to be intimidating for most people. And the last thing we need to do is be not confident in our movement on top of that. So I did that by minimizing how much thinking we're putting into each set and using more movement constraints, so things that are going to have us move in a certain way for a desired outcome, to kind of find her own technique. Now, I also did give her some cues here and there, because with a newer lifter, it's important to also create some of that awareness of like what our body's doing. Like, hey, this is what the middle of your foot should feel like. You know, don't lose the outside of your heel when you squat down, things like that. But pairing that with something maybe like a tempo pause squat that helps us slow down and actually feel those positions out. So kind of combining variations with some cueing, but not a ton right now, because I want her to move confidently. And it ended up working out pretty good, because like I said, when she started squatting, she wasn't hitting depth and she was getting really far forward. But by utilizing tempo pause squats on her back down sets, she was able to feel if she was too far forward, because if she came up, she was going to have to shoot back and then come up, and that doesn't feel very good. So over time, the technique, the midfoot pressure, it started to kind of find itself. With bench press, I like to use long pause singles for her. Reason I picked singles because of how close we were to a meet. And I think bench press probably changes the most under heavy load as far as technique goes. Now you could argue it could be all 3, but I think it feels the most different, and the bar path can change. Like when it's lighter, your bar path can be pretty vertical, but when it gets heavier, it might turn into more of like a J curve or something like that from the side. Now, obviously, that depends more on grip width and things like that, but especially for someone like her with a narrower grip, that like J curve type of bench is probably going to happen a little bit more when it gets heavy. So I wanted her to have practice with that and understand what that feels like to be able to push through that, even though it might feel a little heavy and maybe a little uncomfortable. So I went with the long pause single because in competition, you're also going to have to pause it. Like that's a part of the rule book. And sometimes you might get a ref that is going to make you pause it for longer. So I put a 4-second pause on there so that we can be really good with pausing heavy weight for a long amount of time. And then for deadlift, we just used paused deadlifts. Not super heavy because her deadlift tends to take the most out of her, but just enough to practice her technique. So we had a top set of like 1 to 3 reps, depending on what block it was, and then a paused double right after, like moderately challenging, because she also tends to kind of rip it off the floor. So this helps kind of punish that if she does rip it off the floor, because now she has to pause it, halt all of her momentum. It's going to be a lot harder. So it kind of builds some patience from there. And I'll pull up some technique videos right now as well to compare starting point versus ending point. All right, so showing the difference in deadlift technique. So starting with the right here, this was like her last heavy-ish deadlift before we officially started programming. So this is 302 pounds. And what we're going to notice here, I'll just play it first. Biggest thing we're going to notice is how far she sets up behind the bar. So if this is kind of like the line where the bar is in line with gravity, and this is in front of her and this is behind her, most of her body weight is behind the bar. So what happens is when she starts to push down into the ground, her body has to self-organize around this bar, and it's going to have to move forward to get closer towards where the bar actually is, to be in line with this. And what that actually ends up doing is it throws off the lockout. So it didn't throw it off too much here because this wasn't like a max attempt, but you can kind of see the lockout gets a little sticky. So you can see she starts behind, and we know we're not in the best starting position because as soon as she starts to leave the floor, watch how her chest comes forward and her hips shoot up. Just like that. So what that means is we're starting too far behind the bar. And another indication of this too is the feet. You can see how her toes are pretty much off the ground right now, indicating that all of her weight is kind of back. And then when it comes off the ground, you're going to see her weight shifts onto her toes a little bit more, just like this. And now because we're too far forward, we have to shove our knees forward to get back like this. And then that's what creates a soft lockout. Now, again, I said it wasn't as prevalent here, but you can tell that's what the hardest part was locking out the knees after the hips are already locked out and extend. So this was 302 pounds. This was 330 pounds, which was a PR in training. Again, under some fatigue. This was a week, 2 weeks out. So still get a little bit of that, but not as much in the starting position. Now, we did kind of get some hitching on the quads here, downward motion, which wouldn't count in a competition most likely, but the starting position is getting better, which is what we're looking for. And then this is what it looked like in the meet with 320 pounds here. So we don't have the full video of it off the floor, but from the knees, this is what it looked like. Locked it out pretty good. Unraveled a little at the top, and she did get one red light for that, but overall, pretty good lockout with 320. And we can actually compare the position at the knees. And what we can see is when she gets to the knees, she's more forward at the meet, which is good here. That means she's staying over the middle of her foot throughout more of the rep, which is why the lockout still looked a little bit better here versus this. When she gets to the knees, you can see she's already starting to kind of move backwards and pull everything back, shove the knees forward, and then get too far behind the bar. So the deadlift had a ton of technical improvement. We're going to have some time soon after the state meet to work on it even more, but very pleased with that. Now we can get into some squat technique. Okay, so getting into the squat, again, also saw some really good improvement here. So the video on the right is 200 pounds. And this was before we started working together. This was in like November, roughly, so almost a year ago now. And this is what we got, or a little bit later. It's more like January, actually. So what we can see is she hits the hole very hard, and she's very forward, right? Like you can see those heels come up, and if we look at the bar path from the side, again, looking at if this is where the bar is, she's already starting in front of it in this case, and then it just keeps moving forward. So everything is moving forward, which means it's going to be harder to control it, to decelerate it, because when we're more forward, we are accelerating more, thinking like if we're sprinting, right, we're moving fast, we're moving forward. But if we need to put on the brakes, we need to slow down, we need to move backwards, right, like shift into our heels almost. So I wanted to work on that with her here, and that's where I use the pause squat to help do that, along with telling her like, hey, like, you know, feel your heel as you go down to the squat and try to control it on the way down. And we can see too, because she was so far forward, she wasn't able to get the hip crease below the knee anyways. Now, this is 195, so this is 200. This was 195, I think, on week 3. And this is a really good comparison because it's from the side. So right off the bat, we can see that she is starting more over the middle of her foot, not as forward. Her knees are locked out, which we need for the start command. Hits a super deep squat, and the bar path doesn't really change on the way up a whole lot. So versus here, though, the hips kind of shoot back a little bit, and the bar path is kind of front to back. Now, a little bit of that's fine, and that's going to happen, but we want to limit that as much as we can to improve our efficiency, and we aren't wasting a ton of energy on the way back up. So this was a super good squat day, 5 pounds under her best at this point. And we can see she gets super deep. She's able to get deep. It was just a matter of managing her foot pressure better. See if we just compare the bottom positions here. Like this versus this is night and day different, right? And you can see she's able to get much deeper here. Her heel's more in contact with the ground. Think of this one here. She's also in a heeled shoe, so her heel is really far off the ground in this one on the right versus on the left in flats. And then this is what 215 looked like in the gym. Now the descent speed was definitely still pretty fast, but she definitely hit depth, and it didn't deviate too much front to back. And as far as bar speed goes too, still pretty fast, 15 pounds over what her max was before, which was this. If anything, probably a little bit faster than this one. So saw a ton of improvement technically and just with pure strength here on the squat itself. All right, and then the bench press. So this one is pretty good as far as the bar control goes. I think that's the most notable improvement here. So this was 120 pounds, April 25th. This was before we started working together. And we can see that the bar path is kind of front to back, hard on the way up, lost a leg drive on the way up too, because the butt comes off a little bit. Versus here, this is 140. And what we can see is the bar path is much more consistent. Pauses it on her chest, versus here she kind of pauses it on her shirt. And she maintains some pretty good leg drive throughout the whole rep. So this was a pretty big improvement. This is literally a 20-pound difference right here. Better bar path, better consistency, better leg drive. Just a better concept of bench pressing under load and how to pause it and maintain our technique and all that. So that was the bench press. We don't have too much footage from the competition itself, but I'm going to try to find some right now. Okay, so we were able to find some videos here, and let's just start with the deadlift since we already went over that. Better side angle. So Still some of that pitching forward at the bottom, but not nearly as much as before. And she's able to stay over the middle of her foot throughout more of the rep, and she locks it out very well. And then let's get to the squat. This is her third attempt squat with 215 in the meet. So she hits the hole pretty fast still, but she was able to maintain a pretty vertical bar path. Got a little forward, but that's going to happen with max load, especially with the nerves of a meet, especially the first one. So very good attempt there. And then third attempt bench press. This is 137, so just a couple pounds under the video we just saw on bench. Very good bar path. You can tell she's under control of the load, and her leg drive is also very good. You can see a constant push back, driving her heels down, and it just looks like a very compressed structure, which is what we want out of the base here, so that we have something strong to press from. So very good on all three as far as the technique goes. Now we can get into some programming and what her block looked like leading into that. So she's on the taller side, as you can see. So for her, the bar is going to travel a greater distance compared to somebody who's a little bit shorter. Because of that, she does more work per rep. Like each rep she does is going to carry a higher stimulus, but it's also going to carry higher fatigue. So it's great because we don't have to do as much and we still get a lot of work done. But we also have to manage our fatigue wisely too because of how much stimulus we are getting per rep. So for her, that looked like, generally speaking, using lower rep ranges on her top sets and her back down stuff, so that we didn't get this massive drop in velocity, because for the sake of consistency and producing the most force we can off the floor in something like a deadlift, out of the hole in a squat, off the chest in a bench, we want each rep to be fairly consistent as far as speed goes when we're trying to peak our strength. That's also going to help with confidence, but it's going to reduce fatigue from that heavy weight as well. So for her final block, we get into that here. On the deadlift, she's got a top single, top double, paused, and then 2 sets of 4 competition deadlift. So pretty heavy top set, fairly light back down sets. And went with the lower reps because we noticed that for her, when she does higher rep sets like triples or even sets of 4 that are heavy, the RPE, it's not like a gradual buildup. The first 3 reps might be like RPE 5, 6, 7 maybe. But then that last rep just shoots up to like a 9 or something. So to mitigate that, we went with more sets, slightly lower reps. And it ended up working out pretty good in our favor. On the second day, we went with some RDLs here, barbell RDLs, top set of 5, 2 sets of 6. Extra hinging practice, can never go wrong with that, especially with someone newer to powerlifting. The hip hinge, pushing the hips back, is going to be one of the core foundations of deadlifting and using our posterior chain, so like our glutes, hamstrings, adductors, calves to some extent, to move the load so that the low back doesn't have to take on all that on its own. And just generally going to grow our glutes and hamstrings pretty well, and adductors as well. So very good movement. And to get the extra hinge practice, I also have her doing RDLs as a tempo on the primary deadlift day too, just to kind of reinforce that, getting comfortable with that chest being parallel with the floor, maintaining that foot pressure so we don't just shift everything back. So reducing the hesitancy to kind of stand up with it too early. For the bench press, she's got 2 times frequency. This is what the second day looks like. It's a top set of 5, top set of 3 tempo pause to work on that leg drive, like driving up into the bar under a certain amount of time, and still doing a semi-long pause, 3 count pause to practice the competition demands. And then just 2 sets of 8. So with her, I think it's good we get some sets of higher rep sets in there to work through grinding out higher rep sets, because higher rep sets, we're going to feel that like muscular endurance fatigue a little bit differently than like a low rep set where it's just heavy. So I liked having some higher rep sets in there to practice just grinding through some hard stuff. And it's on a day where she's not already expending all of her effort on something super heavy, so she's got the energy for it. And then on her primary day, 2 singles, set of 4, 2 sets of 5. So pretty basic programming there. I like doing 2 singles on the bench press, and then you'll see in the squat too, to just get practice with that heavy load, because I think the squat and the bench, I mean, all 3 of them are going to operate differently when it gets heavy, but the bench press specifically, because of all the commands involved, I think the more practice we can get with it being heavy, mimicking the style of competition, having 2 singles, there's 3 in comp, but it's similar, good for reducing overall like stress going into it and feeling more ready for the demands of a meet. So that's why we went with 2 singles. And actually, I had given her a single in the blocks before too, but I'll get to that once I go over the squat. So squat, we just do 1 time a week frequency, and that's been working out very well for her. So we have 5 sets on this day. 2 of the sets are singles, so 2 sets of 1, similar to the bench. And then her back down sets are all paused. The reason I did that was, 1, limit the load. She reports that a heavy squat takes a lot out of her. That's like how she feels afterwards. So in order for these back down sets to be productive in a case like this where we're trying to like peak her strength while also not losing all the volume that we have, went with a pause squat. It's 100 pounds in this case, which is pretty light for her. That's like 50% of her 1 rep max, but she's still able to work on controlling her center of mass going into the hole. It's still kind of challenging, like an RPE 8, but I'm not too worried about that because it's so light in this case for her. So we're still working on something that's going to be productive for her, and it's limiting the load here. So more peak intensity, absolute weight on the bar, but a little bit lower average intensity so that we still have some better recovery fueled going into that into those top sets. And then just getting into the singles now. So I had mentioned that I had given her singles before. So this is what the first block looked like. I'm just going to talk about squat and bench. So for the sake of getting practice with heavier weight, in her first block of her 3-block macrocycle, I gave her a tempo pause squat single following her competition top set of 3. So I generally like to go like 3, 2, 1 on the top sets for the macro, especially in something like a prep. Just helps kind of build some natural momentum, and we're working through different rep ranges, so we can also build some of that like raw strength, general strength qualities too. So tempo pause single, the variation is also going to work on that control with heavier weight. Ran that the whole block. And then on bench press, went with a long pause single before her top triple. Now it's going to be more weight, so it's also going to get that potentiating effect, meaning we do something heavier. What we do after should theoretically feel a little bit lighter because we just did something heavier. Now, of course, psychologically, if somebody puts too much into that single, then it could actually make it feel heavier afterwards. But in this case, it worked in our favor, and it made that top triple a lot more confident. Something along the lines of, well, if I can pause 110 for 4 seconds, I can definitely do a triple with 100 pounds with like a 1 to 2 second pause. So it helps instill some confidence there. Now getting into the second block, on bench press, I kept the long pause single, just bumped up the intensity a little bit. And then on squat, I took out the tempo and just made it a paused single. So just kind of tapering the variation down, making it more specific. Did that for the first few weeks. And then the last 2 weeks, I actually changed it to a competition single. The reason I did that is I wanted to see where her strength was at, just kind of like a marker, like, all right, at the end of this block, 1 block out from the meet, where's your strength at? And in her case, her strength was at 185 pounds for an RPE 9 single. So pretty difficult. And The reason I did it on week 3 and not just week 4 is because the loading difference from like pause squat singling, pause squat single with 120 and 185 pounds is a lot of weight to cover. So I wanted to give her a week in between to kind of bridge that gap with that comp single with 135. So ran that, went pretty well. Long pause on the bench, and then we get into the final week, their final block, and we just did 2 competition singles because that top set I go 3, 2, 1, so that sets 1, and then I just turn the variation single into another single because that's also going to mimic the demands of a meet where we have 3 ascending singles. Getting into the bench press, again, it's just like the squat, went from 3, 2, 1. Now we're at that 1 part for the rep range on the top set, and then no more long pause single, just all competition bench single to just practice the skill of benching in a meet. So that's what we did programming wise for the main lifts. Now, as far as any challenges go, so just looking through my notes here, with the squat, I didn't know she was going to do 215, honestly. I thought her strength was going to be closer to like 200, somewhere around there, based on how the second block ended with 185. But it turns out when we bumped up the intensity to start the block with 155 here versus this block starting with 155, but that was for a double, she just ended up coming in a lot stronger. She kind of like came to life in that 3rd week of her prep block, and she ended up smoking 195. If I pull that up here, so we get into this. 195 was a RP8 single, and that was actually the video I played earlier, so that kind of let me know, like, all right, there's more than 200 here. So then the week after, we did the additional taper week strategy. So she normally does 4-week blocks. I added a week to that to shift the week around so that we can line stuff up. So this is what her normal week looks like. Primary deadlift Monday, secondary bench Tuesday, primary squat RDL Thursday, primary bench Saturday. She competed on a Sunday. So to get this stuff lined up, I know you don't like have to necessarily on a lower frequency, but wanted to anyways because we could. I wanted to give her 2 days of rest in between the benching. So for that, I just shifted it around so that she benched on Thursday because she's competing on Sunday. Primary squat, I put that on Wednesday. That's about 3 days in between. That's fine. She doesn't have a secondary squat day, so I didn't think that was going to matter too much. And these were just some practice singles pretty much. And then the deadlift, her primary deadlift's on Monday, competition's on Sunday. That's almost a week. So we didn't really need to make that perfect. And it worked out pretty good. So the taper itself, I guess, we went with tapering the accessories mainly. So you can see the set count drops here, and then the exertion drops in that second to last week. I like to keep most of it in for a while, and then those last 2 weeks kind of start to strip it down kind of rapidly on the leg accessories. Now for her, she didn't do that much to begin with, so we didn't have a whole lot to taper from anyways, so I didn't want to take too much out, especially for someone newer where her recovery is pretty good. Like, it's going to be quick because she's newer to this. So if I take too much out, that might actually work against me. So I kept most of it in at the beginning of the week. As the week gets on, though, and we get to like that 1 week out marker, that's when most of the accessories really start to come out. So like this final bench day here, we went from doing dumbbell press, dips, and tricep extensions to just 1 set of dumbbell press on this day. And then for the leg stuff, she was normally doing like RDLs, leg press, leg extension, hamstring curl. Got rid of the stuff that wasn't attributing to strength short term, so like leg extensions and hamstring curls. Kept in the leg press though, because that could be giving her some extra squat volume because it looks like her squat. So when I'm tapering, I'm looking at what exercises I need to take out to reduce fatigue, improve her fitness so that she can express her max strength. How I'm figuring that out is understanding what is this exercise for. Is this exercise for long-term muscular development? Okay, if it is, I can probably take that out because that's more of a long-term adaptation. So if we take that out for a few weeks, we're probably not going to notice anything insane as far as the dip in performance goes. That's more to build that base that I talked about, like at the beginning of the video. Whereas something like a leg press or an RDL that looks a lot like the competition lift, I'm programming those in this case for her to get in extra competition volume. So we practice her hinging with her barbell RDLs. We practice getting into a somewhat of a squat stance with a leg press. So it's actually attributing to her technique in the short term. And because of that, I don't want to take that out sooner than I need to, because that could actually make her technique not feel as great on the competition lifts. So what is when you're if you're tapering for yourself, what's the purpose of this exercise? Is it to make me strong short term, like express my strength, practice my technique, or is it to make me strong long term? Is it like for general work capacity? Is it for hypertrophy, like getting bigger muscles? Figure out what it's for, and then you can figure out what to remove. So that's why I usually don't really taper the competition stuff too much at all as far as volume goes, because volume, if we think about it, volume is our skill practice. When I say skill practice, I mean practicing the competition movement. That's what the volume is. So that's why sometimes higher volumes work out better, because we're practicing that competition technique more often. Now, of course, fatigue exists, and with that, we have to find that volume threshold where we can get in this skill practice, we get better at the lift, and it makes us stronger, but it's not so much that the fatigue is outweighing that. So I don't like tapering most of the competition volume because that is literally the thing we're about to do. So there's an element of specificity in that too, meaning if I'm competing in a powerlifting meet where I'm doing squat, bench, and deadlift, I should be doing more of that compared to other exercises closer to the meet. And if I'm doing something like a leg extension, that doesn't really look like a squat, bench, or a deadlift, and it's not attributing to anything short term specific to my short term needs to express my strength. So I can probably get rid of that for a few weeks and make my quads a little fresh, a little extra fresh. Of course, there's nuance to all that, but that's generally how I like to go about figuring out what to remove. For her, the really only thing I tapered on the competition list was the intensity on the back down sets. So you can see it says minus 10% from last week. Hopefully you can see it. It might be a little grainy. So just what she did in this last week for her back down deadlifts, since I know those take a lot out of her, minus 10% from that, just to give her a little bit of a taper. Again, we're like 2 weeks out here, so we don't need to get rid of all of it. And then on even the accessories, still keep in some of the volume, but just drop the intensity, give some extra recovery. And then if we get to this Wednesday bench day, none of it got tapered. I actually progressed this day all the way in. Just some of the back accessories. These RPEs are a little bit higher still because the back isn't really going to have as much of an influence on the prime movers, the muscles that are making us squat, bench, and deadlift how we want to as much, right? Like this isn't like our pecs, shoulders, and triceps. And actually the single arm pull down is there for mobility's sake, so it actually keeps her more mobile for her comp lifts. So mobility is another consideration as to maybe that's why you're programming that accessory. If that's the case, maybe don't remove that if it is attributing to something short term, because we could get a mobility change in the short term. And then with the squat, pause squats also take a lot out of her, even though they do create a good stimulus for her. Now that we're at that 2 week out mark, we're not trying to stimulate new strength. We're trying to peak the strength we currently have. So I just had her repeat last week's weight, ended in a 7, so about what it normally is. And then the RDLs, reduced it by 12%, so made it a little bit easier there. And then primary bench press, I actually still had her going heavy. This was actually her heaviest week, 1 week out. Bench press tends to need to be heavier closer to the competition. And then the week of, super easy. This is where the largest pullback is. So competition single, 70%. And then that was on Monday. Wednesday, 3 comp singles ascending, meaning it goes up in weight. That's literally what you do in the meet. So practice that. We just worked up to the last warm up. So 155, 165, 175. Get that practice of what it feels like. I also told her to think about it, visualize like she is in a meet, because we know visualization can improve performance and also reduce performance anxiety if we're like almost pretending like we're there. RDLs, got rid of some of the volume in this week now, because I think if we take it out a couple days before, we're probably fine, and still made it easier. Then on Thursday, this is her last day and her last bench day. It's her secondary day, top set of 5, 2 sets of 8. But instead of it being that tempo pause triple, if we go back to that specificity part I talked about, we're going to be competition benching. We probably don't need to be doing a paused triple on this week. Maybe for some people we do. But for her, I want her practicing that competition technique, because that's what's newest to her. That's what's going to be the thing that will improve her outcome the most. So just all competition, and it's a single with pretty much her opener, 120. And then we competed. So that was that block, and it worked out pretty well. So that was a pretty long video breakdown. I guess one thing I'd go over too is the deadlift before I cap it off. The deadlift, we had to figure out some stuff to get this day feeling strong and performing well, because in this first macro, we originally had her in the macro before this. She was transitioning from, she was going from Planet to Planet Fitness at the beginning of the week. So no free weights there, just Smith machine stuff. So pretty much just like glutes, Smith machine bench Monday, Tuesday. And then at the end of the week was all the competition work. So squat, I think Thursday, deadlift Friday, bench Friday. So it was all clustered back to back. And because she was deadlifting the day after her squat and all of her leg stuff, it was kind of hampering the deadlift output a little bit. So in this macro cycle, I moved the deadlift to Monday because she was able to get to free weight gym the whole week now. But it still was kind of not how I wanted it to go as far as the strength goes and as far as the bar speed looked. And ended up figuring out that we just put her hamstring stuff too late in the week. So if I pull up something real quick to show what I'm talking about. All right, so how we figured out what was going on with the deadlift. So these are like notes that I take on each block. I find that they've been pretty helpful to track stuff, but also see what's going on. So this was the new macro cycle where I put the primary deadlift on Monday. And what we can see here is we have 1 day of rest before the primary deadlift when we do RDLs. The secondary day has more weight in her hands than before, and she's doing her hamstring work on this day, which is before her primary deadlift. Now, this is what she used to do when this was Planet Fitness at the beginning of the week and different gym at the end of the week. Although her deadlift was still being limited by the squat, the hamstring work was being spaced out more. So she had her hamstrings and her hyperextensions, which kind of facilitated the role of the RDL before, 3 days before, 3 days of rest in between. So it was actually 4 days before. And this secondary day, the hyperextensions had less load too compared to the RDLs, and the hamstring work was after, not before. So I think that's a big difference here as far as what helped figure out what was going to change, because then all I did was just try to mimic this spacing. And then the newest block, we get into the prep, is this. So primary deadlift, glutes on this day, 2 days, And then I just moved her RDLs and hamstrings onto Thursday. So it was just a leg day, 3 days in between, primary deadlift. And the estimated 1 rep max I have down here kind of came back to life. So you can see how here that estimated 1 rep max was on the lower side compared to what I wanted. It was hovering between like 270 and 280. But then we get into this one, and this is when I actually moved it from Friday to Saturday, the RDLs, to see if maybe she needed more practice, not more recovery. And it actually made the estimated 1 rep max worse. So that just kind of showed me, okay, that's not what we need. We need the opposite, because you can see it went down again. 250, 247, 260, 296. Now that was a pretty big uptick, but regardless, on the whole, it went down. But then in the prep block, we can see that once I gave her more recovery between those days, it immediately went back up. 280, 284, 320, 346, and then that week doesn't really count. So saw a big uptick once we just changed that. Final thing I'll talk about with the deadlift is pacing. So she likes to go pretty heavy in general. Who doesn't, right? But we were running into some issues combined with like the fatigue part of this, where the RPE in those first few weeks was way too high, right? Like we get to week 2 and it's already an RPE 8. And this load was here because this load was what I thought she could have done, but then we had that fatigue from the hamstring work. So it was just a combination of a lot of stuff. But because this was an RPE 8, by the time she gets into these next few weeks, she's kind of fried already. And the reason we were able to revive this block is because I had her repeat the last week's weight to keep the RPE down. But regardless, we just paced some stuff out better in that third block here, and then that led to a better outcome. So I actually just put the weight in that I want her to lift. So a single with 243, a single with 254, 287. So we see a gradual uptick in load. The RPE isn't getting so high that we don't have anything to recover from. And then that final week, I gave her a range and I let her self-select. And that ended up leading to a 10-pound PR. So that is all now that we're 47 minutes in. Somebody watched. Awesome. Let me know if you enjoyed it. Leave me a like, comment, whatever you want to do. And I'm probably going to have a second part to this going over the block after this. Because now, like I said, we're getting into states and we have like 6 weeks, 6-week turnaround roughly. And we have to get creative there to get her fitness back up, to get her to feel strong again, so that we can hopefully top her performance from this meet. So I'll probably wait till after that meet to see how that goes and then kind of talk about that. But yeah, that's all. Let me know what you guys think, and hopefully we'll be in the next one soon.